everybody to day 2 of the EVOTEK Security Summit. I want to start by saying thank you again to Dr. Little Limbago. The keynote that was provided yesterday was really a telling tale of what's going on across industry, across the world, and the importance of these security programs and the execution. Some of the things that really stood out to me was around, not all programs are staffed adequately. Prioritization and support is going to be required, even for companies that maybe don't have the skill set or the finances to actually effectively implement a security program. Also, the veterans panel, it was an amazing conversation and insights that was provided by those professionals. And I also want to say thank you to those, who are actively serving, those who have served. It's because of you we have these freedoms and these opportunities that we do today. So thank you again. It was an amazing conversation, and the insights were something that I think all of us can take and apply to our daily work. Today's going to be another filled day of activities with engaging and insightful discussions, things like women in cybersecurity. It's going to be conversations around SOC operations, optimizing vulnerability management with asset intelligence, and what's next in SASE, just to name a few and highlight them. There's much more, but I think there's something for each of us to join and gain some insights, make notes, and find ways to consistently improve our programs. And then next on the agenda is a very important discussion around threats beyond the perimeter and having discussions around supply chain attacks. The panelists that will be involved in this have significant industry experience, including program development, risk management, privacy. And another thing that's really important is their tremendous insight into business. That enables them to be very effective in their roles to provide guidance to others as well, whether it's advancing programs or other disciplines that are required to actually protect and enable the business. I think that's really important with their insight and some of the information they're going to be sharing. They have experience across multiple verticals: life sciences, healthcare, finance, professional services, and more. So I think this overview that they're going to provide on supply chain is something that's really important. It was touched on yesterday, but this is something sometimes it is not thought through well within programs and could have significant effect on a business's operations. So I think this is going to be a really good opportunity for us to learn more, and I'm really excited. So at this point, I'd like to see if we bring the moderator on, John Caruthers, who's going to be able to provide more detail and insight into what's going to occur. John, over to you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Gene. Good morning and welcome to day 2 of the 2022 EVOTEK Security Summit. This panel is comprised of the best. And you can see they're joining now, but they truly are the best. 3 of EVOTEK's executive advisory team. These 3 CISOs have more thought leadership than I could possibly define. So I'll start with the introductions. I'll do this for you guys. You don't need to worry about it. I got you. Darren Naftzger brings decades of cybersecurity expertise and formerly served as CISO for PwC and was an associate vice president for security of security for Cognizant. Greetings, Darren. Chris Forbes has been working in cybersecurity for over 40 years, or so he tells us, which means he probably started when he was about 3 years old. He is the former CISO for the Federal Reserve Bank of San Francisco and executive vice president and CISO for the Bank of California. Welcome, Chris. Macy Dennis, the man in need of no introduction. Macy has worked in law enforcement, the government sector, and the commercial space, and continues connecting a community that he has built over the last 20 years in Southern California and beyond. Welcome, Macy. So let's get into this.
I don't know if we should let you do introductions anymore, John.
Well, you stuck with me. This might be a one and done, but we'll see how this goes. Okay. Yesterday, Matt Stamper spoke to the relevance of cybersecurity in his opening remarks. And he highlighted specific threats like the supply chain attack, right? And in addition to that, Dr. Limbago pointed out in her keynote that a big factor of supply chain lies in the fact that we're dealing with legitimate software. That's kind of a big deal, right? And it makes this whole topic tough. This is a topic that our panel will address this morning. And to set that up, long before SolarWinds, supply chain attacks have been a real thing, right? SolarWinds brought it above the fold, as it were, but it really made us admit that the threat has an enduring stickiness. That headline appeared over 13 months ago, and we certainly did not slow down in 2021. Log4j is certainly not the least of this. And Log4j, by the way, led to my favorite tweet of 2021, which was, free open source software is free as in puppy, not as in beer. So I shout out to L Armageddon for that tweet. I'm assuming and hoping that everybody is chuckling right now, but back to the actual discussion here. As the provocateur of this short and speedy session, I want to open up with some questions. And I'll preface with the fact that we might not get through all the points today, as the supply chain story literally never ends. But my hope is that you realize the unique value and executive excellence that this team can bring to your enterprise. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and open this up with my first question. Guys, what is changing and what are you seeing in the supply chain space?
I'll grab it first if you want, John.
Yeah, thanks, Macy.
No worries. So the big thing that I'm seeing, and I had a couple discussions earlier this week on this, is you mentioned supply chain. This is nothing new. You know, everybody gets all, about SolarWinds and, oh my gosh, this is happening. But look back at Target with HVAC. I mean, Darren and I were having a conversation on that. I mean, think of how long ago that was that we've kind of put that on the shelf, or stuckness. I mean, there's so many different things. So what I'm seeing right now is moving from single targets to larger spread. So almost like a spray. When you look at SolarWinds, when you look at, there's been nation state actors hitting Office 365 on a regular basis because you talked about it, legitimate software.
Yeah.
I mean, they're looking for those easy ways in, and it's not just the criminals now. I'm almost seeing from the intelligence sources that I'm seeing, there's actually a heavy shift to nation state, and they're actually putting it into their 3-year plans because they're just like businesses. They actually have them. And, and that's kind of, some of the different changes which I'm seeing.
Yeah.
So that's kind of
okay. Yeah, no, that's great. That's great. And Chris and Darren, I'm going to get to you right now, but in response to this other kind of a follow-up question. So basically what keeps you awake at night, or as I like to say, or kind of spin that question, what is happening while you sleep or while we sleep? And
so,
yeah, go ahead, Mace.
Just to finish and then pass it off to the guys.
Yep.
My biggest thing is the fact that it's shifted more from criminal, in my opinion, to nation state attacks. They've got more people, more money, more time. And when it comes down to it, I may have a slightly different look just from my background and what I do besides at EVOTEK, but this is an intelligence gathering game, in my opinion. It's not just grabbing a foothold and gaining access. It's data collection. And Dr. Lamago talked about it yesterday. She really focused. It's one word that kept coming up that you kept hearing was data, controlling it and what people are trying to get. And when it comes down to it, that's just intelligence gathering so that they can use it later. So that's what keeps me up at night.
Sure.
Okay, thank you.
Chris?
I'll add to that, Macy, in that I think it exposed a weakness in our overall approach to protecting both external supply chains and what we trust to bring inside our trusted, secured zones and kingdoms. The once a year, you're looking at a vendor and saying, do they have all the right processes? Do they, have a SOC 2 Type 2? And then saying, good, check mark, we trust them, now forget about them, is no longer acceptable, right? So whether it be an external cloud that's got our data or operational processes, or we just bring the technology inside, it exposed the fact that we weren't monitoring it, we weren't securing it, we don't have the right levels of detection against the attack. nor are we sort of prepared to deal with the complexities like software bill of materials. Most companies don't even have the ability to deconstruct software to understand every component, let alone to then manage all of that effectively with vulnerabilities, with patching, with additional security controls. So it really has sort of been an additional wake-up call that said this area of practice for security and IT management needs a lot more attention and care.
Yeah,
I like
agree.
that. Yep.
100%.
How about you, Darren? What's keeping you awake at night?
I think just the sheer size and explosion of suppliers that the average company is taking on, over the course of the last 2 decades, it's gone from, most things were being done in-house. You had dedicated services, whereas now everything is, as a service. You can consume things that weren't available to the average company before. That just proliferates supply chain risk, and it's up and down that, from regards to your core technology to business services that your company has, to things that you may be going to market with clients. And then behind that, there's also, a greater dependency on the resiliency of those suppliers to be up. Now, when you couple that with, the cyber threats that those suppliers may have, you really have some pretty intense threats to your organization. If I have some key suppliers that are not operational because they've undergone a ransomware attack or what have you, how does that affect? Am I going to be able to still go to market if I have those 3 key suppliers that are no longer available?
Yeah, and none of this is new. I mean, sorry, John. None of this is new. I mean, if you look at the DoD, they've had these all the time for worrying about anything that goes on a military vehicle or a weapon or this or that. And I'm not trying to drive it back that way, but if you think about it, I got asked this question the other day about the difference between supply chain risk and third-party risk management. And it was great, actually. And Darren, sorry, I almost want you to answer it because you had such a perfect answer the other day. And maybe we even table onto that, but it was really the fact that the supply chain risk management, which is like making sure that you're protected, making sure that your clients are tested and you understand all these different things of where they're at. That's a small part of the overall third-party risk management program. And that's the difference. It's a piece of it. And I think the biggest concern, and Chris said this earlier, this is so hard. One, it's extremely hard to protect against. It's very hard to monitor. And it's very hard to actually be able to identify it when it's in, because it's legitimate usually with a back door somewhere. So I don't know, Darren, you had a great comment on it the other day, just explaining the kind of that difference and how it fits in.
Well, I think when you look at supply chain risk management, it's really your holistic view of, okay, here's my supply chain. How do I bucket risk for that supply chain? And then what due diligence do I apply to meet the risk threshold that's being presented by that supplier? So for example, the supplier that's providing you pens and papers and notepads obviously doesn't have the same risk as the supplier that you're sending PII information out. But that becomes very, you have to have a framework within which you evaluate that risk, establish those profiles, then say, what diligence am I going to apply to this risk profile? And then make sure you execute that across your supply chain. And that really becomes a function of, getting the highest return on the resources that you have available to you.
I'll add to that in that I agree with Darren's comments that understanding where the risk is absolutely the first step. But having an arsenal of techniques that you can then apply to those risks. What I've found in most organizations is, yep, that's a risk. I don't know what to do with it, so we'll just accept it, right? So not that knowing helped you, but I think IT and the security world are definitely challenged to say, okay, we have options, we have solutions, we have choices that we can offer you to help you manage that risk down, not just accept it as, we can't do anything, it's inevitable. But to say, no, let's employ some strategies that help you really contain it or to be ultra responsive should something occur within that particular supply chain or supplier. And so I do think that is the go forward strategy, is to strengthen those tools and techniques that we have available for those situations. Macy.
I wanted to toss. Oh, sorry.
No, go ahead, Macy.
I got one example that's it's a little old for me, but previous employer, we had a client. They actually weren't even in this country, so it's even safer to say. And I'll leave the name out, but they had a supply chain attack. But what it really was just a cyber attack to take them down. But what happened was, I apologize. Let me change that. One of their third parties, which was their supply chain from overseas, coming over this direction, they actually took down the shipping company. And when they did that, it was an attack on that company, but the amount of impact it had on all of their clients, which one of their clients was my client, happened to just be dramatic. And I mean, they were a huge company that just provided almost everything you can think of, from groceries to fans to pillows to whatever it is. And that attack on that individual company had such a dramatic effect all the way up the chain. It was unbelievable. Right. So, and that was probably, I don't know, 6 years ago.
Let me mention two others, because we learn from the mistakes of our predecessors. It's not to shame them, but it's to make sure that we, in fact, don't make those same mistakes twice.
Correct.
So I think about Equifax. They were brought down by struts, right? And it's because it was in their environment. IT thought they had patched every occurrence of struts, but what they didn't realize is there were some old boxes in the corner that had it installed that they just trusted as sort of black box devices, right? So
don't touch it or unplug it.
The depth and the quality of your inventories clearly was the lesson learned there. But JP Morgan, as an example, so they had a vendor that was running their 5K marathon event. And they said, okay, there's nothing really sensitive there. We just have a bunch of employees that have signed up to run a marathon. But sure enough, they got hacked, and then they used that information as well as the facade or the persona of saying, oh, you've got one last form you need to fill out, as all of a sudden now executives who wanted to run the marathon for a good cause had been phished, right? So I think we really have to go back and redefine where is our data, right? And it can even be the innocuous stuff or the stuff that may be trusted or not challenged as much as it should be.
Yeah. No, that's, and Chris, you mentioned the other day too, we were talking to a client and you mentioned about asset management and actually knowing what your assets are. I mean, I can't tell you how many times either when I was a CISO going new into a company or even now in this chair where we go and talk to clients and like, oh yeah, we have only this much. And then they go and do a pen test or something else. And it's like, oh crap, we just found like 400 new devices or something like that. Mm-hmm. I mean,
I was just going to say, that's the same for suppliers, right? What you see is, just like shadow IT, you see shadow procurement. You don't know how centralized your procurement is. It's very important that, the CISO or his designee who's running the supply chain risk management sit down with the head of procurement and say, realistically, how centralized is our procurement function? Do we have capabilities where business unit leaders or partners in our organization are taking a corporate card and engaging services? Because that's you have to have a multi-pronged approach based upon that analysis to be able to say, okay, do I have clean line of sight into my entire supply chain? And the answer may be, just working with procurement may not be enough.
Well, and Chris talked about all the SaaS, where we're going and where everything is and how and we talked about the data. That's huge. I mean, what stops a developer from, getting their own, Git account and, or whatever else, and they're working on the stuff that they're supposed to be working on, for whether it's a movie or a video game or whatever else. And, they grab some code that's free out here, helps me get done, 4 hours quicker. And, I'll just tweak this. And you don't know what's in that code. And even worse, they may just put something back up in the wrong folder on the wrong SaaS solution. So yeah, it's definitely a risk.
Yeah. Hey, John, before we just take the conversation in a completely different direction, I'll let you maybe go on to the next question and
No, it's good.
Participate.
No. It's, we're continuing to build this narrative around supply chain, and don't get me wrong, as a moderator, I am not the least bit offended that I haven't been allowed to speak. The free form format is working with this dais, and I appreciate that. I was going to ask, is there a silver bullet to address this? But I'll go ahead and answer that with one word, two letters, no. But what can we in industry, what can enterprises and companies do to protect themselves from a lot of the use case scenarios that we're describing in this chat right now? What are some of the things that can be done?
Well, I'll start the conversation, though. I will say it's a long list, in my opinion. But so everything, in my opinion, begins and ends with inventories, but also with the amount of trust that we assume in our environment, right? So I know a lot of times IT says, well, I can't block the entire web. Our business would grind to a halt. Okay, well, that assumption or that mode of operation says we now have to react after the fact because we didn't know that the data was there. We weren't monitoring for signs of attack or compromise with that particular, SaaS provider. So there's really nothing we can do other than respond after, something bad happens. So I think trust, we absolutely should go back and revisit that. And until you're confident that it's safe to trust something, maybe you err on the side of caution and said, well, no, let's block that and go through a case by case and selectively open and then figure out how do we monitor those things that we have decided to trust, and then how do we block or make
kind of that trust, but sort of that trust but verify.
Well, I think we're already in that. I'd almost say don't trust, and I hate to use the word zero trust because it's overused, but start with the assumption that it is just the Wild West out there. And the fact that you leave the back doors open for anyone in the business to go put our sensitive data anywhere they want is a wrong assumption, right?
Got it. Yep.
Yeah, I would 100% agree with Chris. I mean, you have to almost treat it like everybody else's network is Starbucks. You almost have to treat like yours is. Let's be honest. And have the right kind of controls and monitoring in place, whether it's on purpose or accidental. I mean, I remember it. One of my pharmaceutical companies that I worked at, an admin was working with a senior executive, and she had some stuff she had to work on, and she just sent it to her Gmail to take it home so she could work on it because it was already late at night. It was non-malicious at all after we did the investigation, but it was like she didn't want to undock her laptop and take it home, and she was just trying to do the work. But that's those simple things where, you have to put those controls, and because we were monitoring, it hit a flag, and it was a simple phone call, and we went through and cleaned it up, and it was fine. But, it's one of those things where you just have to have those different things in place. And egress filtering. Oh my gosh. Like people just don't, they're like, oh, I don't worry about anything going out. I'm going to block everybody coming in. Well, it's smart to have both, because it's the only way that you're going to be able to control things. So I don't know.
Yeah.
No, I would just add, if you have limited resources on what you're going to be, beyond your cybersecurity controls and your risk management, I think you need to focus on some very fundamental things. And when you do that bucketing of your suppliers, it is where's my PHI, PII regulated or sensitive data? Is it going outside? Those suppliers go to the top of the list. Do I have suppliers that have logical access into my environment? They're on the top of the list. And then lastly is that resiliency question, right? How dependent am I on my suppliers? Which of my suppliers am I most dependent on? And how do they affect my business if they were suddenly to go away and on a Tuesday afternoon? I think those are the critical questions that need to be asked to understand, okay, where do I start my efforts to make sure that if I am going to do some level of inspection of my suppliers and get a good understanding of the risk they pose to my organization, it's probably the best place to start.
I would say it's never too late to go and get a good inventory. It would have been better if you had been involved in those discussions proactively or before the decisions were made, but the reality is they're there, right? So I think it is a organizational decision to then say, okay, let's get our inventories. And once we have those inventories, I agree with you, Darren, you can prioritize, you could figure out the multi-year roadmap to how do you clean it up. But it kind of all begins with understanding how big the problem is, both internal, external, your external cyber security attack surface. It is a much bigger problem than most CIOs or CEOs are prepared to deal with. But I think you just have to be the bearer of bad news and said, here's the truth, right? Let's figure out how to deal with this.
So, and also just to that point, so you don't have to clean up again, because I've been there for that too, where it's like you put that program in place to where you're continuing monitoring and something new pops on that didn't go through change control. Hey, what is this? And that's something simple as just, is there a ticket in from, help desk for new laptops? Is there something new getting added? A server? I mean, those types of things, if you don't monitor it, it will get out of hand again. I mean, just like company drives, where sometimes you have a drive that everybody uses as their Dropbox to be able to transfer stuff, and then you don't know what's left out there. I mean, those things are treasure troves.
Right.
Sorry, off topic again.
No worries. No worries.
Chris can club me.
No, he can't. He's too far away. Maybe the virtual club. So Macy, you started off this discussion with an answer to my question of what does the new landscape look like, and you mentioned a shift towards nation state actors, right?
Yeah.
So what does that targeting look like with nation state actors? Are we talking about like Department of Defense targeting? Are there any demographics that are in the specific crosshairs, or what are your thoughts on that?
So everybody immediately goes and thinks that they're just going after the government and DoD or military stuff. I'd say, looking at some of the different plans I'll just pick on two countries which everybody knows and expects. I mean, it's blatant, Russia and China. So they actually have their 3-year plans, and Russia doesn't quite put it out there, but China's not shy about putting it out there to where you can see it and everything else. But they're going after everything. It's not, I mean, DoD, they're still doing that, but I'll give you an example. They go after Facebook, which Russia just lives in there and just constantly is going through. That is an intelligence gathering piece, so that they can then go, okay, I've got information now on someone that does work at the DoD or a defense contractor, and I can use that to figure out how I can get information on that individual to either turn them or gather data or own their machine, or, it goes through all these different things. But they do the same thing on pharmaceuticals. They'll do the same thing on solar is a big target right now. Mm-hmm. The technology there, different types of electric cars in different areas. They are hitting everything. So it doesn't matter what you're selling or doing. I think they're pretty much targeting, because, when it comes down to it, it's business and money, even if you have a military unit that's coming after that data. Yeah. So.
Yeah, no, totally agree. And, and speaking of money, historically it was pretty easy, right, to establish attribution between, like, let's say, financially motivated cybercrime and nation state. I think we can all agree that a lot of the nation state activity is being conducted to fund terrorist activity or, nationally motivated programs. And Matt Stamper and I frequently talk about OFAC, right? The Treasury Department's terrorist watch list, in other words. And there's a reason that we're starting to get some of these cyber gangs and cyber enterprises listed on that, and it's for that very reason, right? The blend of attribution is becoming too obvious for us to ignore. Totally agree.
Yeah, well, and sorry. One of our architects actually made a comment in the chat about economic war. That's exactly what it is. Mm-hmm. I mean, and what we're doing is reducing our risks. That is your main goal. You have to take a risk-based approach. You have to understand what you can and can't do. You still have to do business. So you have to build a program where you're really focused on a risk profile and essentially a program that you've put together, because you can't just wing it. That just doesn't work.
Right. I'll add that the possibility of being collateral damage also expands, right? When nation states go in and attack SolarWinds and Kaseya and these other broadly used technologies, while the primary target may not have been your mom and pop store down the road, they are getting swept up in that as well. And, and the old approach of who is targeting us no longer applies. You may be targeted whether you like it or not, or whether your industry is not for profit, has zero value to anybody, but you're still collateral damage. And that is forcing a lot of maybe lesser enterprises, lower value industries to sort of ramp up in their game to prepare for it, to deal with it.
Well, especially if they have access into, they look at what is the access that you have, whether or not it's again, going back, it's how can they use you? And that's the whole thing with a supply chain. I mean, it's finding organizations or software or whatever else it is to use to get into other companies. I mean, it's the whole thing with chip manufacturers, the risk that they always have. So.
Yeah, well, and I think you're seeing that with social media. So from a social, I was just going to say, I think we're seeing that from a social media perspective, right? So a company that does any type of announcement, a go-to-market strategy with a new partner, you can guarantee there'll be a business email compromise attack right behind that, typically. Social, to nation state actors and also, crime motivated or monetary motivated attacks are really up with the use of social media, and they look for new relationships, new announcements to springboard off of that to do an attack. Yeah,
no, I would agree. Chris, you were about to hit on something that I think is great.
Mobile devices. Again, we always protect the kingdoms, the servers, the data centers, the communications wires, but that mobile phone has just gotten smarter and more dangerous, where it potentially is a backdoor or an avenue into privileged conversations as well. And it has been tightly protected or controlled as, say, a corporate laptop or a corporate desktop. So I do think mobile is another area that we absolutely have to, set in an equal set of controls and protections and monitoring and capabilities or restrictions. Don't trust your employees. Don't trust your CEO that he's not accidentally going to load some spyware on his phone. It does happen.
Yeah, I got to throw something out, and I'm not quite sure how to tell you to go protect it in the sense, but everybody's working from home. I mean, how many people have, Echoes or Google, sitting there listening as they're using it for their Wi-Fi and everything else and stuff. And the phones are just as bad. I mean, people worry about someone putting a listening device somewhere or whatever else. And it's like, do you realize how easy it is to just turn something on the phone and record the entire conversation? I mean, it's not rocket science if they can teach you how to do certain things on YouTube, if you get my drift. Sorry, John.
No worries. This is great. So we hit earlier a little bit on third-party risk management, and I want to dive into with a couple of the minutes that we have left, a little bit about attestation and validation. Darren, I was actually going to call on you because your voice is nice.
I was just going to say, I think
what do you think?
I was just going to say that if you don't have a lot of tools in your toolkit, it is one of the things, like, if you have vendors that are pre-existing, you're going to have contract language, and absent being able to do other things, to Chris' point, you're still going to have those attestations, but is they simply take that attestation and file it away in a file folder and say, checkbox, that activity's done. What's really important is that you're looking at the attestations that are being provided by your suppliers, and does it align to the services that you're getting from that supplier? And if the answer is yes, that's great. And then you work through what were the issues that were identified in that attest, and then make sure and have a keen understanding of how that's going to impact your business. If not, then hopefully you've got a right to audit clause that's going to allow you to either work with your risk management function or your internal audit to say, this critical supplier, this is what we're getting from them from our attest contract clause doesn't align to our services, and we need to go out there and do some work relative to that supplier. So, but all of that behind good hygiene, cyber controls, all being in place. Management function, the second line that backs up those good controls.
And I've heard you refer to like the hot stove effect. If you wouldn't mind, I thought it was so good when I heard it from you before. If you wouldn't mind expanding on that real briefly.
Well, I think there's just, I think with many suppliers, there has to be, you have to have an understanding of what are absolutes. What are the things that absolutely you need to make sure are not happening within your supply chain. And so that is a critical component of being able to have a very concise view of what my overall risk is. Because if you do not have absolute statements, you do not have thresholds on what, how suppliers are acting, those policy directives aren't through your company, then it makes it very hard to manage your supply chain.
Yep. Chris, you had a comment chambered, if you wouldn't mind, and this will be part of our final thoughts.
Yeah, so I think there's a lot of good information that can be gathered or harvested from the attestation or validation processes, such as material fourth parties, right? So while your third party, may have good practices, if they rely on open source software or less trusted vendors, are you aware of that, right? Are you aware of those dependencies or those vulnerabilities that they may have? The other is concentration risk, right? If everybody is sitting on Amazon and there is an S3 outage, right? How many of your critical suppliers are knocked out because of one material fourth party?
Great point.
So I think inventories are the start of that, but understanding the upstream and downstream dependencies and interrelationships also helps you to better prepare for particular scenarios. I know phone outages were scenarios that we used to go through. Say if you lost the phone systems on the East Coast, are we out of business, right? But that's now extending to cybersecurity as those threats become more and more real.
Great. Hey, Macy, Macy, before I kick it over to you, we're in that final thoughts phase of this panel, right? And so we're coming up on the finish line. Darren, what final thoughts do you have from a thought leadership point of view with regards to this massive topic?
I'm going to go circle back to a point that Chris has made a couple of times, which is you've got to know your universe. It's just like the assets that are in your environment. You've got to know what the totality of your supply chain is. If you can accomplish that, you're well ahead of the game, and then you can start to manage the risks that are within that universe. But if you don't have a clean view into what that overall population is, you really have blind spots that could lead to, very, very serious consequences.
Yeah. Awesome. Macy, do you want to bring it home?
Yeah, I hate to say it, but I'm going to sound like Darren. I totally agree with Chris. If you don't know what you're dealing with, even taking the risk-based approach and putting a program together, you're just hit or miss on whatever you're able to focus on. Right. My biggest thing, I think that it frustrates me, and I would say to take away from this is it's not just you said it, there is no silver bullet. It's not just a solution. It's not a product. It's a program. So that's people, process, technology. I mean, it's coming through, and there's a reason. Right. Yeah. Well, and there's a reason why the technology is at the end. You have to know where stuff is, like Chris and Darren said. You have to have a program in place. You have to be able to monitor things. I mean, it just doesn't work without that. And the tools are nothing but more than a byproduct of helping you do what your program is. So,
just one, I'll just echo or add to what Macy said. You also need to make sure you're having a conversation with your executives and your board of directors. Yes. Right. This is a legacy debt that it may not have been created on your watch, but you're there, right? And getting your arms around that problem means having the right resources, the right sponsorship, the right prioritization to truly understanding the size and magnitude of this problem, right? You're not going to fix it with the half a person, that does, SOC 2 attestation reviews, right? It really is a big challenge that requires the right type of approach to truly getting ahead of that curve, right? Yeah. So have that difficult conversation with your boards and your executive teams, and put together a plan that
Awesome.
will succeed.
Yeah, and I would point out that I would quickly point out that everybody on this dais can help enable those conversations with the executives and the board of directors. Just give us a call. Macy, what were you going to say?
I was just going to say, to Chris's point, risk profile, and it's not the CISO's job to define all of that. The chief risk officer, chief data officer, the executives, just like what Chris was saying, it too much gets pushed on our peers to where even if they don't have the title or in their responsibility of jobs, they're told it's your job. It's not. It's those individuals that Chris identified, that they have to make that decision, a business decision for that risk. So sorry, cool. I know we're
no worries. Over. No, we're done. We are at time. Thank you to all three of you. Your thought leadership is literally unparalleled. I think some of that was seen today in our short time together. But I learn every time we talk, argue, and brainstorm. So if the three of you would give a virtual wave on your way out of this stage or off the stage, so that we can move on to the next presentation. So I will say that right now we're going to take a 10-minute break before the Women in Security panel, which promises to be equally, if not more so, enlightening than what we just heard. So I will see everybody in 10 minutes. Thank you.